All right. We're in lesson 9 tonight. Lesson 9, page 83. Welcome. I think this is the group that we're going to have. Looks about right. Running a couple minutes late. No worries. We do have a lot of information to get to. I might end up having to cut some of it if it goes too long. We'll see what happens. Everyone knows there are donuts and some drinks. If you need to get more throughout, I say need. I'm with you, okay? Feel free, no problem. We do have the heat on here for the first time this season. If it gets too hot, special dispensation to open a window, not a big deal. Okay, good. Yeah, it was very cold when I walked in here. So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, today we are talking about the Triumphal Entry. And here's how the lesson is going to go, because there's kind of a lot to it. So there's going to be a little bit of review about what we did last week with the Transfiguration, because it goes into that. We're going to talk about people's expectations of Jesus as the Messiah, a little bit of teaching from Jesus about that, the Triumphal Entry, which we would typically think of as Palm Sunday, and then, time permitting, we'll talk about him cleansing the temple, but that's a whole lot of stuff, so we'll see if we get to it, maybe not. But let's open up in a word of prayer and we get started. Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for everyone who was able to make it out. I just pray that you be with us during this time of study and discussion, and let us see things that maybe we haven't seen before and come to know you and the story of your Son in a deeper way. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen. I do need 2 volunteers for tonight. Sounds like I'm going to do a magic trick, but I'm not. I have 2 scriptures that I need to be read about 3/4 of the way through. Anyone willing to read some scriptures later? Okay, I got one. Can you pass that to my father, please? Do I have another? Greg, you're the best. Can you pass that to Greg? You can just kind of find that at your leisure and use it as a bookmark. And they're important verses to hear, but we'll be sticking in the gospel that we're in. So that will help me out a lot. And because we have a lot to get to, we don't have any kind of more fun icebreaker questions. So we'll dive right into your book. All right, on page 84, should be right at the top, Jesus' teachings concerning his death. All right, paragraph starts, after the disciples recognized Jesus' deity, he began teaching them that he would suffer rejection by the Jewish leaders. As the opposition to Jesus Christ's ministry increased, so did his warnings to his disciples. But they regarded the increased opposition as an opportunity for him to show his power. They could not grasp the prospect that Christ would die at the hand of his enemies, even though he repeatedly warned them that he would. Following the glorious scene on the Mount of Transfiguration, Jesus cautioned the 3 who had been with him not to tell anyone what they had seen or heard until he had risen from the dead. He repeated the warning a little later to all the disciples, adding that he would be betrayed and killed. Okay, so we're going to dive into some of that. We're going to be starting off in the book of Mark. Was some of that not in your book? Is that, did I see a few?
It was only 4 and 7.
Oh, okay, good. At least it was around there somewhere. All right, we're going to be in the book of Mark, chapter 8. All right, there's a lot of content tonight, but I'm going to do my best to not make it too lectury and jump into some discussion pretty soon here. All right, we're going to look at a couple quick verses in Mark that all have the same idea. So Mark 8, verse 27. And Jesus went out and his disciples into the towns of Caesarea Philippi, and by the way, he asked his disciples, saying, "Whom do men say that I am?" They answered, John the Baptist, but some say Elias, others one of the prophets. He saith unto them, But who do you say that I am? Peter answered and said unto him, Thou art the Christ. And he charged them that they should tell no man. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things, and be rejected of the elders and of the chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. Turn with me to Mark 9, verse 31. Mark 9:31. For he taught his disciples, and said unto them, The Son of Man is delivered to the hands of men. They shall kill him, and after that he is killed, he shall rise the third day. But they understood not that saying, and were afraid to ask him. And then Mark chapter 10, verse 32. And they were in the way, going up to Jerusalem. And Jesus went before them, and they were amazed, and as they followed, they were afraid. And he took again the 12, and began to tell them what things should happen unto him, saying, Behold, we go up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man shall be delivered unto the chief priests and unto the scribes, and they shall condemn him to death, and shall deliver him to the Gentiles. They shall mock him, shall scourge him, and shall spit upon him, and shall kill him. In the third day he shall rise again. Okay, so we're seeing a lot of similar content. He changes what he is teaching slightly with each, gets a little more specific. You saw that last one was much more specific on exactly what would happen to him at the hands of the Jewish leaders, the Gentiles, who would be the Romans. And this all takes place shortly after the Transfiguration. Once they saw Jesus in his full, at least 3 of the disciples in his full God-like glory, the teachings on his impending torture, death, and resurrection, it all starts ramping up. And you start getting much more frequent teachings on the cross and what's about to happen after this event. Now, a curious thing that I would like to get your opinions on, in what we just read in Mark 10, in verse 32, they were in the way going up to Jerusalem. Jesus went before them. They were amazed. As they followed, they were afraid. And there's a couple different textual renderings of that, depending on what scholar you like. But his disciples are amazed and afraid as they're following Jesus up to Jerusalem. I'm curious as to what you think about that. And I can tell you, even though we didn't read the whole chapter, there is little to no added context that is just as odd of a little descriptor, even if you read the whole thing through. What do you think they're amazed and or afraid about?
Maybe amazed at the way he just was explaining, but he wasn't like so sure about it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they were afraid because they didn't have any involvement as well.
Yeah.
Maybe some kind of conflict.
Mm. Okay. I like that.
Maybe, even though they saw him do all these things and they were part of it at times, maybe they just sort of still couldn't comprehend the fact, because not everybody comes from a rise like that.
Yeah.
So maybe, that's the sticking point, I think.
Yeah.
So maybe that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other thoughts?
To me, it sounds like they're actually describing awe.
Oh, awe. Okay.
It's,
Like at his, what exactly?
I mean, they're being awestruck, and you would be amazed and afraid of this thing. It's like that kind of, that kind of feeling that they maybe are.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
You read three different verses, or series of verses.
Yeah.
Is there any significance to the fact that 2 out of the 3 he speaks in third person?
Mm.
The first one he did not. that was just Mark's talking about it. And
Yeah.
then the next two did. But that's just not,
He does often speak of himself in the third person, especially as he's using the Son of Man imagery, which we had talked about back in Luke. Because it's not, while he is saying, in a sense, I will be betrayed and delivered up, by saying the Son of Man will be betrayed and delivered up, he has that whole theological backing from Daniel, like we had explained when we talked about the title, Son of Man. So yeah, it's not a normal thing, like in the human space, but in the Gospels, Jesus frequently refers to himself in the third person. Yeah. A good question, though. Yeah, did you notice in Mark chapter 9, it does explain that his disciples, they didn't understand, and they were afraid to ask? I think that was, 9:32?
yeah.
Yeah, they understood not that saying, and were afraid to ask him. Which is an interesting thing. Like, you kind of wonder if he's been teaching it to such an extent, they still don't understand it, and it's like, we're too far down the rabbit hole to not get this.
Peter was also rebuked for asking the same question, like, in half a chapter before that, too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, when he kind of questions, like, what are you talking about? You can't do that, you know?
Yeah, and they also didn't want to get scored for asking to,
Yeah. Yeah, if you call Peter Satan, my goodness, what's going to happen with us, you know? Yeah. Yeah, and I think, as far as the amazed and afraid, kind of a mixture of what was being said, that, so even if they didn't fully understand what was about to happen, he told them it was going to happen in Jerusalem with the chief priests and the scribes, or, you know, all the religious leaders. And by Mark 10, that's where they're heading. So whatever's going to happen, even if they don't understand the full weight of it, they know he's heading towards it. And in, don't turn there, but Luke 9:52, this is the same scene here where he's doing the teaching, and it says that he basically has diligently he's set towards Jerusalem. It's this very deliberate, I'm heading there and nothing's going to stop what I'm doing. So it's a very determined, he's going to Jerusalem. So I think a mixture of what Ron's saying about how he's telling them, he doesn't seem too broken up about the fact, what he's saying. He's telling them something miraculous and they don't know the extent to which they'll be involved, and there's a lot going on here. But yeah, so as we're getting closer to the event, Jesus is teaching more about the fact that all these things will soon befall him. Okay. So that's Jesus, a little bit of his teaching on the coming events. And now we have the disciples' expectation about what's going to happen, and the kind of the people's expectation about what's going to happen. So before we read anything, we're going to move to Matthew. You can feel free to start getting there. But I'm curious, what do you guys think that the disciples expected to happen in Jerusalem?
I think that they may have thought the same thing that most of the Jews thought, that he would just take care of this as a king, and take care of their enemies and just be the king and Messiah, and we're done. But not realizing that there needs to be a blood sacrifice of him.
So starting the revolution, basically, kind of kicking things off.
Yeah, they just were hoping, I think, and thinking that, the Jews were hoping, thinking that the Messiah was going to be this king that would lead them, when in fact, it's not really what happened.
Okay.
He died so he could save them, is really what, which is actually much better than just being a king and leading.
Yeah.
If you can pull it off.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah.
If you pull that off, yes.
Yeah, the one time, did Thomas say, he said he's got to go to Jerusalem. Thomas said, well, we might as well go die with him.
Yeah.
You know, that's what he said. So maybe they were afraid, and they got caught up in all the commotion.
Yeah.
And if they actually, I don't know what how they were thinking. They might have been thinking like your dad said. But if he's talking about death and resurrection, and they were thinking about everything, Thomas was at least thinking, he's going to get himself killed. We're going to wind up dead with him. You know, we might as well go get this over with. So maybe they're afraid about that. The whole thing come crashing down instead of being kings. They're all dead.
Yeah. Yet, not so much doubting, but Thomas was really a pessimist. He was just not a positive person. That seems fair. I get that. Okay, so do we all pretty much have this idea of, like, all kind of on the same page of, like, you think this is probably what the disciples expected in Jerusalem? Any other ideas besides the revolution? That's fine, we don't have to be that. That's what I would imagine. Unless, were you going to say something, Ron?
Yeah.
Oh, you had that look in your face. Of deep pondering, like you were about to say something profound. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so they were expecting, we're going to say they were expecting him to take the throne as king. Do you think they had any reason to expect this? Was this a valid expectation, or is this just bonkers?
They thought he was the Messiah, right? That's what they expected.
Yeah. Okay, so as the Messiah, you would expect that. Okay. Anything he said or did that might indicate some of that?
Maybe reviewing the church leaders,
Mm.
you know, the authority.
Yeah.
So I guess he's ready to step up.
Mm. Yeah, he definitely acts like he's in charge of things. Yeah. Okay. Now we'll look at, we're going to look at Matthew 19. And I think over the course of the rest of the lesson, I think I'm going to be slowly building a case for the view of the apostles that trying to help us really understand the disconnect between what they expected and what happened. And I think it makes more sense than we might give it credit for sometimes. So we're going to be looking at some of that. Okay, so Matthew 19, verse 23. Then said Jesus unto his disciples, Verily I say unto you that a rich man shall hardly enter into the kingdom of heaven. And again I say unto you, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. When his disciples heard it, they were exceedingly amazed, saying, Who then can be saved? But Jesus beheld and said unto them, With men it is impossible, but with God all things are possible. This is just for context. Verse 27, Then answered Peter and said unto him, Behold, we have forsaken all and followed you. What shall we have therefore? Jesus said unto them, Verily I say unto you that ye which have followed me, in the regeneration when the Son of Man shall sit in the throne of his glory, ye shall also sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And everyone that hath forsaken houses, or brethren, or sisters, or father, or mother, or wife, or children, or lands, for my name's sake, shall receive 100-fold, and shall inherit everlasting life. But many that are first shall be last, and the last shall be first. All right, I read that passage with what we were talking about earlier. Was their expectation of him taking over completely unfounded? You know, you have some stuff like this. If I heard this, lines up pretty well with the general Jewish thought of the day. Like that seems more reasonable, where we kind of say, like, okay, like you could understand maybe expectations of the culture, but then even just some stuff that Jesus is saying, a little bit reasonable. Did you turn up the heat a little bit? Is that what you're doing? Okay, good. I don't really get cold anymore since I live underground.
Those stories,
Yeah.
2 years.
Yeah.
You guys used to.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I understand that other humans get cold, so I appreciate your go-getterness on that. Okay. Okay, so we read that verse, and trivia, this exact same thing is in the book of Mark. Does anyone happen to know, maybe Pastor might be the only one, what is changed? Like, what is the one difference in the book of Mark for this passage? Pastor knows.
Listen, you gotta tell me where you're at.
No, it's all right. Okay, so as he's talking about anyone who forsakes houses, lands, mother, father, wife, children, all these things for the gospel's sake, Matthew explains it will be restored to him hundredfold. Mark adds, in this age, which has baffled theologians for 2,000 years now. So when we're trying to build a case for the apostles misunderstanding or having there's some level of disconnect between what they expect and what happens. And I think we can start building a good case. One, that maybe we don't fully understand what Jesus did always and how in line it actually is with what the apostles thought, and we'll unravel that. But then there are some things that Jesus says that really point to back their understanding of what was going to take place. So they're not crazy, they're not stupid. There are legitimate theological differences in understanding here that will get us to different places. And I'll leave you with that half-solved puzzle as we move on. But what were you going to say?
Guys, you're just trying to piece everything together from what they've known.
Yeah.
With what he's telling them.
Yeah.
Because I always thought at a point in time, they realized he was the Messiah, they realized he was the only one God, the Father. So as he tells them all these things, because he's really talking about like two different periods of time, mm-hmm. Kind of mushed together, and you got a little bit of end time as he gets closer to the cross. Mm-hmm. He's talking about second coming, but they're still in the first mm-hmm. coming and what he's got to do. So they're trying to piece together the Old Testament, what they know, and fit it into what he's saying. And mm-hmm. sometimes, even with us now, it's hard to figure out.
Yeah.
But did that answer the question of what was different in Mark?
Oh, Mark's the one who adds, in this age, there will be restored the things that they've given up. And that would be a whole study in and of itself.
Does that mean now? Does that mean now? In this age? It can't be now, because the reality is it doesn't happen now. So I take it as a promise of later.
Okay. Yeah.
And,
sure.
And you can tell them when this age stops. When does this age stop? Because we're dispensationalists. You don't know that, but you are. You're dispensationalists. So this age technically ends, the time of the Gentiles is over, and you're into what's next.
Depends on where you're going with this.
Depends. Where I'm going is just if we believe this age. Mm-hmm. So this age extends to what?
I guess the second coming.
Yeah. That's how I do. Mm-hmm. Right.
Is there an argument on the natural side for like when he mentions when he's on his throne of glory and the age referring to being on the throne of glory?
Yeah, that's why I wasn't going to assume where Pastor was going with his line of thinking, because there are so many ways you could take it, and you could take it in a more spiritual sense, that like even when people, for Christ's sake, have lost family and this and that and all their standing, that they've gained something far superior in their, now you have this new family that is the church, and there's a whole lot of ways you can take it depending on what you think this age is. Is this age this present age, and then you have to spiritualize it, or is this age that age when I'm sitting on my throne in glory? That wasn't the main point, but yeah, this is much ink has been spilled on this topic.
So, you know how most of us here, I think, have made a text or an email.
Once or twice.
And if I text something to Greg,
Yeah.
and I'm leaning more on a couple of words, that he would know that if I was speaking to him in person. But if he read it a certain way, he may think I mean something else.
Mm-hmm.
He may be offended, or you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, do you think then in 27 that Peter said it extremely nicely?
Mm-hmm.
Because if he didn't, it sure sounds like, okay, Jesus, so what's in for us?
Yeah.
I mean, so if you say it that way, you're kind of like, you say, maybe.
Yeah, I always imagined a sense of extreme earnestness because they've been following him for like 3 years now. They've lost all.
And I did as well, but it's just interesting only because that's what we deal with in today's world.
Yeah.
Where,
Nuance.
Yeah, what are you getting out of it? Yeah. What am I going to get out of it?
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And I think he might have, if he had said basically, or if that translated it as, listen for me.
Yeah.
Jesus may have scolded them a little bit and then
Yeah. Yeah. Then they never would have asked a question again.
Yeah, no, I just think it's interesting because, you could really look at it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
And then they took the Holy Spirit later to in their eyes, right? Because they were still in the flesh, they were still just being taught,
Mm-hmm.
right, before do that, but
Right. And it
this
just.
is their understanding of these,
Yeah. Yeah, they obviously have a lot more understanding by the time they're being inspired to write these texts.
Yeah.
And I think there's a significant amount of, I guess, humility in the idea that, okay, so as Matthew is being inspired to write this, he's on the other side of the cross, he has the Holy Spirit, he's witnessed all sorts of crazy gospel things, and he still writes about the time where he is baffled and at his wit's end by things that Jesus is saying, and doesn't try to paint himself in a better light. They're just completely okay to let you, almost let themselves be the butt of the joke as we understand what's happening. We're like, the silly disciples at it again, okay. So now we're going to look at a couple of parables that Jesus teaches in relation to, a few things. I think we'll just kind of leave them to themselves. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 20, verse 17. And I'm just going to, it's a pretty short parable. I'm just going to read it and then we'll ask some questions. All right, Matthew 20, 17. And Jesus, going up to Jerusalem, took the 12 disciples apart in the way and said unto them, Behold, we go up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man shall be betrayed into the chief priests and unto this. We already read that, didn't we? Yep, we're heading to Luke. That's what it is. I looked at the wrong note. We're heading to Luke chapter 19. Luke chapter 19, verse 11. Yeah, this makes a lot more sense. So this is a full-length parable. I'm going to read the whole thing, and then we'll deal with some questions there. Okay, Luke 19:11. And as they heard these things, he added and spake a parable, because he was nigh to Jerusalem, and because they thought that the kingdom of God should immediately appear. He said, therefore, a certain nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and to return. And he called his 10 servants and delivered them 10 pounds, and delivered them, and said unto them, Occupy till I come. But the citizens hated him, and sent a message after him, saying, We will not have this man to reign over us. And it came to pass that when he returned, having received the kingdom, then he commanded these servants to be called unto him, to whom he had given the money, that they might know how much every man had gained by trading. Then came the first, saying, Lord, thy pound hath gained 10 pounds. And he said unto them, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Because thou hast been faithful in the very little, have thou authority over 10 cities. And the second came, saying, Lord, thy pound hath gained 5 pounds. And he said likewise to him, Be thou also over 5 cities. And another came, saying, Lord, behold, here is thy pound, which I have kept laid up in a napkin. For I feared thee, because thou art an austere man. Thou takest up that thou layest not down, and reapest that thou didst not sow. And he saith unto him, Out of thine own mouth will I judge thee, thou wicked servant. Thou knewest that I was an austere man, taking up that I had not laid down, and reaping that I did not sow. Wherefore then gavest not thou my money into the bank, that at my coming I might have acquired my own with usury? And he said unto them that stood by, Take from him the pound, and give it to him that hath 10 pounds. And they said unto him, But Lord, he has 10 pounds. For I say unto you that every one which hath shall be given, and from him that hath not, even that he hath shall be taken away from him. But those my enemies, which would not that I should reign over them, bring hither and slay them before me. It's one of the darker parable endings. Yeah, okay. So you've probably heard some version of that before. We usually hear about it with the talents, which I can only imagine is a translation difference, maybe from Matthew saying it in Hebrew, to a Hebrew audience, Luke speaking to the Greeks or Romans primarily. So I read a lot. What are your first thoughts? What jumped out at you there? Or what questions did you have?
What the third server did in layman's terms.
Oh, so he did nothing.
Okay, so he did nothing.
Yeah, so he had his sum of money.
Hey, I didn't do anything. Here's your money back.
Yeah. So out of fear, he didn't do anything, and Jesus, the master said, "Hey, you at least could have put it in a high-yield savings account so I could get some interest when I came back." Yeah.
Let's pretend we know nothing about finances. Alright?
Sure. Let's try.
Is that a cultural thing?
What?
When he gave him the money in the parable and said, occupy them.
Yeah.
So, to me, and I don't know if Randy's talking about this or not, but if somebody gave me something to hold, I'd be holding it. Was it automatically assumed in this culture that you're going to go and invest this? See, I wouldn't have gotten that either, because if that wasn't the way, then he should have said, well, listen, so make some money off of this.
Mm-hmm.
So was the culture automatically that's what you would do if somebody asked you to do that?
Does anyone have an answer to that?
I think that was occupying.
Yeah, what does occupy?
the occupy is the normal way of life. What would be normal if the master gave the servant X amount of whatever, and you need to work this.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a field, sometimes it's cattle.
And not finance.
Any current, see, here he's teaching finances, so they're given an amount of money, they're responsible for it, you need to go work it.
Yeah.
And not just sit on it,
Yeah, it's...
and that's the occupy.
So it was a cultural thing.
Well, it's more of the role of the leader who's leaving for a time, and it's not so much, hey, can you hang on to my money? It's like, you're my investment banker, and I say, hey,
Do what you think is best.
here's this. Or like you said with a field, hey, work my fields while I'm gone. It doesn't mean just hang on to it. It means you work it. So that's the arrangement that's happening here. He's a master there, the servants. It's not just hang
Just asking.
Yeah.
Because if you read simple in this thing for face value, that's why I asked, and how to relate to culture.
You'd be set to get your money back.
Well, you have a choice.
But you know, you shouldn't hold cash. Inflation is tricky, you know?
You can lose it too, so.
Yeah, because they're on his behalf.
Yes.
They're actually his ambassadors. They have his authority in this matter, and it's left to the discretion how he's going to manage that.
Yeah.
Just like us, we're stewards, we're totally general disciples, even though, you know, leaving, we can't, you know, occupy till I return.
Mm-hmm.
We need to live a life that Christ wants us to do. We're ambassador, and we're to, in essence, be his representative, even though we're not him. So we're to exhibit Christ-likeness in our lives and, you know, do the things he would do, be how he is to others and that kind of thing. So it's the same thing with this. And Kim's right, what the occupy means is really important. Yeah.
Okay, so what, you kind of touched on it there. What do you think in this parable is about? Like if you were to say what's the actual application for his disciples, what does he want them to understand from this?
Spread his word, to keep spreading his word, even though he's not there.
Yeah, so he's not there. Where's he going?
Well, he crucified.
Right. So this is the assumption with what's about to happen, right? That like, okay, a ruler is going away on a long trip. He's going to inherit this kingdom, right? So we're assuming he's talking about, well, he's not going to be around with them for a long period of time. After the cross, after the resurrection. Is this what we're thinking? Right? Is anyone thinking anything different or nothing?
Just listening.
Yeah, it can explain a little different, so you get the long view of what he's.
Well, so that's the thing. I'm trying to ask, like.
I get the correlation.
Yeah, like what are we? Because it's a parable. Okay, so this man never existed. It's a story to illustrate his point. So I don't want to put too much of my own, because it's obviously open to some interpretation being a parable. Because we're going to look at another parable and then compare them a little bit. So, yeah, what would you guys say is the parallel to the ruler leaving into this far country?
To be doers, not hearers.
Yeah.
There's rejection in this.
Mm-hmm.
There's rejection, and in that rejection, there's still evidently God still has a servant.
Mm-hmm.
The guy still has a servant. So not everybody's rejecting,
Mm-hmm.
but the main people involved with this master are not interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to start thinking about other things about Israel rejection of Christ as the Messiah. He's still going to go away. He still has his believers, his servants, and they're responsible and accountable for him to occupy until he returns. When he returns, they'll be presented to him and they're accountable to him for what they've done as he begins to set up his kingdom. And then you get, all the judgment, his glory, and the kingdom's established. And he's away now, so that includes us as servants.
So we're viewing this as primarily a post-resurrection reality? That we're the working servants, so then the reward and judgment at the end of the parable is some allusion to Judgment Day of some kind? Is that what we're thinking?
So it seems like today.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, that part, it sounds, in the Revelation, in a great way from God.
Yeah, especially when
Judge the ones that didn't want to be.
especially when you do the count. right, Brian?
Yeah.
Yeah, that wicked evil servant's gonna be, it sounds like that. So that gets
Yeah.
muddy,
Mm-hmm.
and I personally, I can't make sense of that.
Yeah.
This one helps make sense of the other one to a point.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. If you've heard this preached at any point, it's usually with the talents, because even though that's just a denominational specifier, it's just like a certain sum of ancient money. In the English, it sounds really good, because then you can talk about what you're doing with, the talents that you're, the things, and it usually becomes just this sermon of, and good, like, I'm sure I preached that sermon of, like, what are you doing with what Christ has given you in whatever field that is, and that's a great sermon, great message. The interesting thing is that in Luke, it tells us why, like, what the point of the parable was at the very beginning. If we caught it, where was that? Verse 11? It was, as they heard these things, he added and spoke a parable, because he was nigh to Jerusalem, and because they thought that the kingdom of God should immediately appear. So he tells this parable primarily to bridge this gap between what they expect of him and what's actually going to happen.
So he felt he needed to reinforce the idea of, hey, back only.
Yeah.
Right?
Seems that way. Seems that way. Okay. So he does another parable in verse 20. Chapter 20, verse 9. And leading up to this, he's having a little kerfuffle with the spiritual leaders in Jerusalem. Verse 9. Then began he to speak to the people this parable. A certain man planted a vineyard, and led it forth to husbandmen, and went into a far country for a long time. And at the season he sent a servant to the husbandmen, that they should give him of the fruit of the vineyard. But the husbandmen beat him, and sent him away empty. And again he sent another servant, and they beat him also, and treated him shamefully, and sent him away empty. And again he sent a third, and they wounded him also, and cast him out. Then said the Lord of the vineyard, What shall I do? I will send my beloved son. It may be that they will reverence him when they see him. But when the husbandmen saw him, they reasoned among themselves, saying, This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, that the inheritance may be ours. So they cast him out of the vineyard and killed him. What therefore shall the Lord of the vineyard do unto them? He shall come and destroy these husbandmen, and shall give the vineyard to others. And when they heard it, they said, God forbid. And he beheld them, and said, What is this then that is written? The stone which the builders rejected, the same has become the head of the corner. Whosoever shall fall upon that stone shall be broken, but on whomsoever it shall fall, it will grind him to powder. And the chief priests and the scribes, the same hour, sought to lay hands on him, and they feared the people, for they perceived that he had spoken this parable against them. Similar parable, but different. Anything jump out at you with this one? Any thoughts? What's that?
Greed.
Greedy. Okay.
They didn't want to be given anybody who had authority.
Yeah.
They want to do their own thing.
Mm. Yeah, for sure. Any other thoughts? Anything jump out at you?
This parable always strikes me. I always think that by this time when he's doing this parable,
Yeah.
and the scribes and the Pharisees understand he was talking about him, that somewhere in the back of their mind, they really had an inkling of who he was.
Mm-hmm.
And they decided we're not going to do this because we're not going to upset the whole system we have in place.
Mm-hmm.
Our Jewish faith was put that way, what they had.
Yeah.
So, it's complete rejection of what is rightfully God's,
Mm-hmm.
and destroy the prophets, no messengers, and then the Son, he sent the Son. Christ was there, and they're rejecting him. So then there's that thing all the time, judgment.
Yeah.
Because we live in a moral universe, God is a just judge.
Okay, so again, it's like we discussed with the last one, it's important, especially when the text says straight out, like, what this is about. Like, not a lot of parables don't have that information and are just kind of left for you to meditate on. But this is another one where, like the first parable had a reason right off the bat. This one has its reasoning right at the end. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the religious leaders were very upset with this parable because they understood that he was talking about them as these corrupt, wicked husbandmen, the workers hired to do the master's work. And they had been greedy and violent and rebellious. So he gets to the end, and they're upset because they know he's talking about them. Okay, so we can say with some level of clarity, okay, this parable is about the Jewish religious leaders. What's that? I don't know what you could be talking about. So my question with this one is, if we believe that he is talking about the religious leaders, why is there the same trip into a distant country? Because this would clearly not be, by the time this servant is sent, the son is killed. So this isn't about Christians after the resurrection. How do we have these same two things in these parables that clearly don't match up with each other? What do we think this far trip is kind of about?
Because he let the religious leaders, from the Old Testament, God had them set up in a system, but they just corrupted it so much.
Mm.
Jesus let him come straight from the example. Like Esther said, they didn't want to give up a good thing, and yet go on there.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's absolutely, that's the role, that's the position I would take with it, where it's not so much, so with the first parable, we're very quick and confident knowing what's going to happen with Jesus, to say this is about Jesus leaving and leaving his servants in charge. And in this parable, even though the language is extremely similar, because we know who it's talking about, we're confident in saying it, maybe not so, because again, it's a parable, not so much of a literal, the master went off into a far country, but the idea of God has left Israel to be his husbandman. In the Old Testament prophets, Israel is compared to a vineyard on multiple occasions. Isaiah has at least 2 songs about that, where Israel is a vineyard. Usually God is fencing it in, hedging it in, protecting it, feeding it, all that stuff. So the parable tracks very well with the Old Testament prophets. But we're sort of forced to look at it. You have a lot of the same symbolism happening, and we're making them 2 completely unrelated events. And I'm not saying that's wrong. At the very least, I'm saying we have to be very careful in assuming, some ruler going into a far country. Oh, well, that's Jesus ascending into heaven. Because we just read a parable where that is absolutely not the case. Okay? Because it clearly has a different idea. And this master who is in a far country, figuratively, because God has left Israel to do his work, he sent messengers and servants, and they beat and killed them. we have a good image of the prophets that have been sent to Israel over the centuries, and they reject them, they throw them out, until he finally sends his son who they will kill.
Would the first parable maybe be directed more towards the Christians as, just everyday people living a Christ-like life, and the second one maybe be more directed towards the ministers and the priests that are supposed to keep, the scriptures and the word, like two separate. This is for the hierarchy, this is for the regular people, kind of. That's a warning to them, to the leaders, the religious leaders.
Yeah.
And then you have, in the first parable, it's like, to keep doing the rules, to follow Christ. Following his example as your everyday life.
Yeah.
With the animals.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's almost just.
No.
Two separate things.
That's the tricky thing that I was considering when I was reading these over, where, yeah, they're clearly separate things, using very similar imagery. It almost makes you wonder how different they are, because either way, like, yes, we could say one is New Covenant, like the New Testament, one is Old Covenant, but they sound remarkably similar in what is expected of the people. Yeah, I don't know that I got to a full conclusion on exactly what there's a connection, like there's something very similar happening in the language, and then yet they seem to be about very different scenarios. So I think you're on the right track there. But they're parables.
Would it help if like the one we're talking about now, you just think to help you process it before the cross, and the second parable think after the cross? Would that help a little bit? Like this parable we're talking about now is just think before the cross.
Yeah.
And putting it in its, I guess, time context.
Sure.
To help us.
Yeah.
And the other parable after the cross. If that would help some. And how you sort it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're right, the Lord always had a witness in time past, before Christ came, always, and Israel was the primary vehicle for that.
Yeah. Yeah, so if in the first parable, the judgment, when he rewarded or punished the people, we were considering Judgment Day, as that's after the cross. What's the judgment talked about here? The religious leader, it's not specified, but the religious leaders say, okay, you've killed the son. You've killed the master's son. Now, that's the judgment is coming. What judgment are we referring to here?
Judgment of the wicked. They have a lot of responsibility. They were leading the people, but they were leading that long ahead.
Yeah.
Jesus at other times. They're putting more burden on people if they don't follow their preaching.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's interesting that they not only realized it was about them, but they were the guys, like they were the top tier, but they said they feared the people, so they're fearing, not for the first time maybe, I don't know, but they were usually feared, and now they fear.
Heavy is the head that wears the crown, right? That's, so it's interesting, if you read Machiavelli, of all people, his idea is that kings are relatively stable because for the most part, they don't care too much about the local people, so they don't bother them too much. And they always have the threat of execution hanging over them because if people don't like you enough, they'll just kill you. That's Renaissance politics for you, I guess. But yeah, no, it's that same idea. they're scared to interact with Jesus all over the place because of the people.
There's a familiar, saying in these times, with great power comes great responsibility. I had to say.
Yeah. Who thought that one little Spider-Man quote would have so much power?
I don't know.
Okay, so it's 8 o'clock, which is crazy because we did not even get to Jesus on Palm Sunday riding the donkey to Jerusalem. I obviously can't cover that much ground. It needs much more space than that. And I can't skip it, so I'll have to condense something next week. Okay, so I'll start wrapping up what we did do. One, to answer my own question from earlier, in the second parable about the religious leaders, I think what Luke especially and Matthew make pretty clear is that the coming judgment is the judgment of 70 AD, when the temple is destroyed, when Judea is leveled by the Roman armies. So especially as in that parable, Israel was likened to a vineyard. He said, okay, the people who were supposed to keep the vineyard, they didn't do this, they rejected the messengers, the servants, they killed the son. And when judgment comes, he says, I'm going to slay them and give the vineyard to others who will be faithful people. And that's something we don't have time to fully get into because it's not the idea that Israel's done away with and, I'm going to bring in new people. We find out through the New Testament, especially the letters of Paul, that what's actually happening is faithful Israel, the faithful servants who remain faithful, are still good. They're still, all the apostles are Jewish. These are good Israelite people following the Israelite God and Jesus. And then you have the message of the gospel is opened up to the nation so that everyone who believes is grafted into the family of Abraham. Everyone becomes Israelite in the spirit. That's not how Paul says it differently. Not all Israel's. Yeah, there's an idea of spiritual Israel that, like that old Sunday school song about being, Father Abraham had many sons, and I'm one of them, and so are you. It's that idea that the people who come to faith in Jesus become true Israel, grafted into the family of Abraham, the promises of Abraham. So the judgment that is expressed in the parable, that while Jesus isn't super explicit about it, the way the rest of his preaching is gone, it seems that he's just giving warning after warning that judgment's coming, like Assyria when they took the northern 10 kingdoms, like Babylon when they took Judah. The new Babylon is here, and that imagery gets pushed further into the New Testament, that their judgment is coming, and it is for the same thing that it has always been for, generations, centuries of rejecting God, killing his messengers, being unfaithful stewards or servants. So we'll end on that super dark parable. Next week should be interesting, because at least we can have a happy Palm Sunday lesson. Any closing thoughts, questions, concerns, interests? Cool. Grab a donut on your way out.
It would with you.
And we'll pray and hopefully have a much more efficient lesson next week. Lord, thank you for this day. I thank you for what we were able to get through in your word, and I just pray that you would help us to have a level of clarity and understanding regarding some of the deeper and more difficult and shadowy things that can be expressed. And I just pray that we would gain some level of understanding on these things and who you are and what Jesus came to do, and then we would understand, as the disciples needed to come to understand exactly what was going on in Jerusalem that day. So I pray you be with us, pray you bring us back safely next week, and pray that the rest of the series would continue to open our hearts and minds to some new ideas, some new things we hadn't quite seen about who you are. Your name Jesus said prayer. Amen. Amen.
There also says it's not how much you're reading,